We are talking Redbad. This is actually a Dutch kind of medieval historical fantasy movie directed by Royal Renee. And I say historical fantasy, this is actually based on true events, true people, but it's been embellished and kind of like, changed around so to make more of an entertaining movie. Hence why I call this a historical fantasy, because it is only partially based on real events, if that makes sense. Things like, for example, we have ultimately the Frankish, who are the French ultimately, speaking English, for example, and then we have like the Frisians speaking kind of modern dialect of Dutch. So stuff like this. The story's been changed kind of to make it a kind of an interesting film, just like Braveheart. And that is the movie this movie is trying to emulate here, Braveheart. This is essentially a Dutch equivalent of Braveheart, taking a kind of a popular historical figure and kind of making him to a hero for the people. So this focuses on Redbad, who is a disgraced prince of this Frisian tribe, who is ultimately banished because he kind of went against his father's orders, because he kind of disagrees with the somewhat barbaric practices that they kind of preach, human sacrifices, stuff like that, and kind of feels that they should kind of evolve. So he's ostracised and ends up on the shores of Denmark, where he's kind of adopted by the local kind of king there, and ends up marrying his daughter, who is actually a Christian. In the meantime, we have the Frankish army, who ultimately at this point is kind of pushing their kind of a Christian agenda across Northern Europe, and ultimately want to kind of convert obviously these people into the Christian ways by force, if necessary. And ultimately it comes to a head where Redbad returns back to his people and tries to unite them against the kind of the Frankish enemy. So let's discuss Redbad. So if you are a fan of movies like Braveheart, these historical kind of epics, lots of kind of like battles, lots of kind of blood and dirt and mud and everything, then there's a lot to enjoy here. The cinematography, first of all, is absolutely stunning. They do an absolutely great job here of really making the scenes kind of like pop and have a kind of like a visual flair. It almost seems like the contrast's been turned up a little bit to kind of give it this kind of like somewhat of a kind of unrealistic feel, but nonetheless it looks really effective. And there are some really kind of well choreographed battle sequences here that are quite violent, quite bloody, as you'd probably expect from this sign. There's a lot of characters that you can kind of enjoy, and there's lots of interesting set pieces. Now, if we look at the negatives of this movie, first of all, the big one here is this movie is too long. It's 2 hours 40 minutes, and it could have been cut down by an hour, at least 40 minutes, to make this kind of more a punchier film. Because unfortunately, there are scenes here that do drag, and also several subplots that I feel could have been ultimately cut and made the film a far more of a punchier kind of movie. There's also some horrendous overacting from some of the kind of from the milder characters. I always find it quite difficult to judge kind of foreign movies in regards to sometimes their acting, but there are a few characters here that massively overact. On the subject of foreign language, obviously, like I've said, this is a kind of like it's partially spoken English, partially in Dutch, but you can get an English dub if you want to watch it all in dub. So, but it is ultimately quite an enjoyable film, I have to say, despite some of its flaws and some of the kind of like quite frankly, the two-dimensional way that these people are portrayed. For example, the Frisians are all kind of the altruistic good guys, whilst the Frankish Christians are presented to be pretty much all bad and kind of, heartless and evil and everything. So it kind of gives you very kind of like black and white depictions of the good guys and the bad guys, so to speak, when ultimately, life isn't quite like that, as we kind of know. But this is kind of, like I say, a semi-fictionalised version of events here to try and make an entertaining movie. Interestingly, this was actually apparently the biggest box office bomb in Dutch cinema history. The budget here was around 8 million euros, and it only made a fraction of that back. But it does look like, if you are interested in kind of like well-produced kind of like medieval epics, and this is definitely worth a watch. I mean, I would say if you're a fan of maybe like Aaran, which is also a kind of another kind of historical kind of fantasy movie, it's kind of, you can watch it in vain with that. Obviously, it's not as good as kind of like your Bravehearts of the world and things like that, but obviously if it's kind of like on a tier down, but it's still worth a watch, I would say. It's very well produced. The characters are quite well defined, and you know, you can kind of get behind them. Some little dodgy acting, a little bit overlong, some kind of like overly simplified motivations and stuff like that. Make it not quite the classic I don't think it wants to be, but nonetheless it's still an entertaining movie, so I'll give this movie a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.